bring in Jeff Pierce joining us. Let's look forward maybe. Let's say that we just bury this bad inflation expectations number under the rug for a moment, Jeff. Assume today's going to be all right. Nvidia's up 4%. It firmed yesterday too. Is that in anticipation of this event next week? Could this be kind of the thing to get us back on track?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, if you look at the outside factors that have been putting a lot of pressure on Nvidia, of course, the AI competition, the DeepSeek news, the tariffs, all causing investors to really sell off this, beloved chip maker, which is put it down to that 105 support level. And of course, we've bounced off. The stock has gained back some ground later this week, or later in the week, but it still has a lot to go. The deceleration we've seen in the data centers, especially in the last earnings report, 20% year-over-year growth compared to the triple-digit growth rates we saw in the prior quarters. They've got a lot of competition in the U.S. and outside. That's raising some questions about their valuations. The good news is they've got their products. The Blackwell system contributed about $11 billion in revenue in Q4. They expect that to continue to rise. So as we go into this conference, which is set to kick off next week, CEO is expected to speak on Tuesday around 1 Eastern. Investors, of course, going to be focused on the latest revolutions of all things AI, including software, services, processors. We're expecting to hear, more information on some of these releases, including the B300s, which some expect them to have a big performance jump compared to the B200s, perhaps larger than what we saw from the H100 to H200. There's also a question of arrival time. Expectations are in the second half of the year for that. Some are looking for Q3 as opposed to Q4. We might get some information around that. Then, of course, we're going to hear about Rubin, their next-gen GPU series as well. A lot of these things could put some momentum behind this recent kind of bounce we saw midweek, and at least that's what NVIDIA is hoping.
Okay. NVIDIA is kind of leading to some extent. I don't want to say we're in the middle of a bounce. It's pretty tenuous still, but it definitely is one of the kind of the early movers here to get its market kind of back in shape. I do wonder, though, if that will push up expectations for some kind of big product unveil. It seems like we're mostly talking updates still and more kind of continuation of what's obviously a very powerful story. But is there anything here that's like, extremely novel compared to what we already know about what they're doing?
It's going to really be about the updates, certainly, but the technology jumps. I mean, we talked about the Rubin.
Okay, so I guess how fast it's moving,
Exactly.
We can still be surprised by that.
What we're going to see in terms of memory, in terms of power, if we look back at Computex in 2024, the company revealed that Rubin features 8 stacks of HBM4 memory. We could even hear about the Rubin Ultra chip, which would be the kind of the next iteration of that. We're likely going to hear about Vera CPU, NVLink switches, Connect X9 cards, so on and so forth. I think NVIDIA has some proving to do right now, especially with this DeepSeek overhang still present. They, claiming just about 5.5 million to train those V3 models compared to the hundreds of millions we've seen with OpenAI and other companies. That open source model also put some pressure on. If you ask NVIDIA, they say it's net positive for NVIDIA. DeepSeek is because it'll accelerate the adoption of AI tech more broadly. That remains to be seen. In the meantime, they want to overcome these headwinds, further restrictions on AI. They want to make sure that China is still an important revenue source for them. It was about 13% of their total revenue last year. And then, of course, tariffs, disrupting supply chains, imports, costing more are all going to be headwinds. So this technology is the only way they continue to charge more, to continue to have those huge margins that investors have expected from them. Okay.
If they tell us, if Jensen gives us some numerical update on how many chips and machines they've sold to support DeepSeek models, would be pretty interesting. But there's also kind of an ongoing investigation as to whether or not China got access to chips they weren't supposed to build DeepSeek. So I'm not sure what kind of that relationship is going to be like. So there's some uncertainty there. And to your point about how fast the tech is moving, I think that's pretty important too, because all this is still quite new. So if the experts and the Uber nerds tell us that the gigahertz per second, or I don't know, whatever it's going to be, is like, some astronomical figure beyond their wildest imaginations, then I'm sure that could be good for a couple percent bounce.
It certainly could. And I would say, keep in
Maybe get us
mind,
back to 120.
well, that's a big question, right? That would be a big jump, but I think you could
Almost there.
certainly put some momentum to them. I think, keep in mind, listen, we've seen Nvidia fall before. You look back in 2018, falling 55% as we saw those GPU inventories change, as we saw crypto mining demand kind of change later. Of course, they focused on gaming data. We saw that come back. Pandemic, we saw a huge recovery after a drop. Even more recently, you look back in July, an almost 20% drop on, hey, AI spending is going to slow down. Look at the recovery since then. So you don't want to count them out, certainly with this the technology they can release. Now, it's a big hill to climb because they have to continue to improve on this every single year. And the question is, which year are they going to really fall flat? Yeah. And I don't know that this will be the year, but that's what investors are really hoping they don't see.
I actually like the crypto reminder in this case, because that too, even though it might have been producing a bunch of useless coins, it was still a very new technology to run all these rigs and nodes and needing the NVIDIA chips. And so to your point about the potential for surprise technological advancement on the AI front, that was a really fun time to trade NVIDIA because it was really explosive in a lot of directions as people continued to be surprised by the demand and what was necessary at that time. So, all right, anything's possible. We're almost to 120. 140 is the other big line on my chart. Kind of seems like a long ways away, but it only took NVIDIA a week to get from 140 to 120. Maybe next week you can do the opposite. Appreciate it, Mr. Pierce. Let's trade it with Dan Deming, managing partner at KKM Financial. Do you share such optimism, Mr. Deming? And happy Friday, sir.
Happy Friday, Oliver. We'll see if it's going to be happy by the end of the day. That number at 9 o'clock kind of sucked the wind out of the market a little bit, but we'll see if it can hold. And as you guys pointed out, I think it is something that is to some degree rear-looking, and hopefully as we do see some of these recent data points indicating that things are calming down a little bit, that hopefully that's enough to kind of quell some of the concerns. But nonetheless, Oliver, yes, when you look at Nvidia, I mean, honestly, it got pulled down with everything else. But yesterday, it actually held in there reasonably well relative to the selling pressure in the market. And today, you're seeing a nice move continuing to kind of try to dig itself out. I think that, I think the market's going to hit a low here in the next week or two. Honestly, Oliver, I think, we're going to get some more clarity and some of the data is going to come in. It's going to indicate that things are cooling down a little bit. And hopefully that it just doesn't get to a point where it's going to be, a significant downward cycle as far as expectations. But I think that we're near, at least a short-term bottom. And I think when you look at Nvidia, the way it's kind of led this move higher, that it's going to continue. So today's trade example is to capture further upside over the next 2 months. This is extended position that is being highlighted today in this example. And again, defining risk to the downside, I think that's key right now. I think anything that you look at, unless you really want to own something down here, defining your risk to the downside with the ability to capture a pretty big upside range in this trade example today.
Okay. So take me through it. I love the sound of big upside range. And you're selling the 145s, not the 140s, which was the level on my chart. So maybe that is live after all.
Well, the reason I'm doing that, Oliver, and I did look at so initially I kind of, for the trade example today, I looked at the 120, 140 call spread, but, that cost about $6 to $6.5. Well, actually it's $6.5 for the May. I was looking at April as well. But, then I started thinking, well, if Nvidia gets anywhere close to its old-time highs, at that point, maybe you'd have to think about, is this something you want to get short going into the second half of the year, or at least, think about what the opportunities are once you get up there, and or the options in this case. So this lowers the break even. So really that's why I raised the strike, Oliver. So, the trade example today, buying 120 May call and then selling 145. So it's a 1 by 2. The break even on this is 165. So that would be new all-time highs if we get up there by May. I don't see that happening. However, I do see the possibility of us getting closer to those recent highs, which is around, that 140 level where there's resistance, maybe possibly above that. But this gives you a big range to the upside. It lowers your break even, defines your risk to the downside, and that's kind of the thought process that went into today's trade example.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Like the chart work, like the exposure, so you can take part in a good rally. But you also are trying to make it affordable for yourself. And,
that's the idea. Exactly.
And it kind of is a bet that when Nvidia makes a move, it's going to be a big move to the upside.
Well, and even if it's not, again, it's got 63 days till expiration. So, if we just hold these levels for the next week or two, and if the market can find some stability and start to maybe move higher as we move into April, even if Nvidia gets up to the 130, 135, then this thing really starts to take hold. Again, you don't really have any significant risk on this until we're above 165. That's very optimistic. Not going to happen. Certainly it could happen. That would be a new all-time highs for Nvidia. I think the market is somewhat capped here in this level. Hopefully we'll find some stability. I don't know if we're going to get back to the highs in the first half of this year, but nonetheless, I do think that we'll find some higher price action over the next month or two.
Okay. A nice commentary and hopeful trade. Positive in tone on a Friday morning with stocks up. I knew you would deliver, Dan Deming.
All right, Oliver. Sounds great.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
You got it.
Managing partner, KKM Financial.